Hello, and welcome to Cogito Ergo Pod. I'm your host, Daniel, and this is the show where we think, therefore you know the rest. This is the space where we dissect and delve into the fascinating, the complex, and the esoteric corners of theology, philosophy, and mysticism. Today, we are returning to a heavy hitter of a topic, evil in the Bible. But we're not just looking at it broadly, we're narrowing it down and taking our focus to a very specific and often overlooked collection of texts. We're looking at the letters that make up the latter part of the New Testament. Specifically, we're talking about the letters known as the Pastoral Epistles. That's 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus, and the general epistles, Hebrews, James, 1st and 2nd Peter, 1st, 2nd and 3rd John, and the tiny, fiery letter of Jude. Now, why these letters? Because they give us a different picture. They aren't the revolutionary spark of the Gospels. They are the voice of the 2nd and 3rd generations. This is what evil looks like when the revolutionary movement starts to become an institution. A quick historic note. Most of these letters are pseudepigraphical, which means they were likely written after the death of the apostles, by followers writing in their names. This wasn't to deceive, it was a common ancient practice, using the authority of a great master, like Paul or Peter, to address new problems his followers were facing. And this is the key, new problems. The first generation of leaders were dying off. The communities were facing internal fractures, outside pressure, and a ton of anxiety. For these authors, evil wasn't just an abstract philosophical problem, it was a clear and present danger, a specific force that was trying to tear it all apart. So let's look at how these specific letters define evil. I see 3 major categories we should be worried about here. The evil within, which is our own desires, the evil between us, which is social and communal collapse, and the evil from outside, which can be deception, and our old friend, the adversary. Let's start with the personal, the internal. The author of the letter of James gives us a startlingly modern, almost psychological take on where evil comes from. Now, we don't know for sure who this author was. The letter is traditionally attributed to James, the brother of Jesus. What we do know is that this letter feels less like a typical letter and more like a collection of Jewish wisdom sayings, and it's steeped in the practical, ethical, day-to-day world. And this author asks, James chapter 4, verse 1, what causes fights and quarrels among you? He answers his own question. He says they don't come from the boogeyman, they come from your desires that battle within you. In chapter 1, verse 14 to 15, James is even more explicit, tracing the entire life cycle of an evil act. He writes, each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desire and enticed. Then, after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is fully grown, gives birth to death. For James, evil isn't a demon that possesses you. It's an internal process. It's a seed in our own desires. This desire is the Greek word epithemia, which is a strong, neutral passion. It's the same word used for craving. It's not the desire itself that's evil, but the process of being dragged away by it and letting it become our master until it gives birth to death or destruction. The author of 1st John echoes this. He points inward in 1st John chapter 2 verse 16 to what he calls the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. That pride of life is a fascinating phrase. It's not just arrogance, it's the obsession with status, appearance, and worldly success. It's the evil of keeping up with the Joneses in a way that hollows you out. The pastoral epistles add one more crucial and very famous internal source of evil. In 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 10, we read, for the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Notice, it's not money is evil, it's the love of it. A disordered internal desire that is a root from which all kinds of evil can grow. So the first stop in our tour of evil is our own heart. It's our own disordered desires, our pride, and our attachments. But that internal pride doesn't stay internal. It spills out. And that leads to the second category, the evil between us. This is where these authors get really practical. These early communities were small. They were minorities, and they were often under intense social pressure. An internal fight wasn't just a disagreement, it was an existential threat. And this is why James is so ruthless. In chapter 2, verses 2 to 4, he paints a picture of a community gathering. A man walks in wearing a gold ring and fine clothes. Right after, a poor man walks in wearing filthy old clothes. And the community says to the rich man, "Here's the best seat in the house." And to the poor guy, "You stand over there," or "sit on the floor by my feet." James is horrified. He says, "Have you not discriminated against yourselves and become judges with evil thoughts?" For James, this partiality, this social snobbery, is evil. It is a complete failure of the community's entire purpose. In the small, intimate house church setting, this favoritism would have been immediate, personal, and incredibly toxic. Then in chapter 3, James gives us one of the most vivid metaphors for evil in the whole Bible. He talks about the tongue. He calls it a restless evil, full of deadly poison. He calls it a world of evil, and sets a whole course of one's life on fire. James chapter 3, verses 6 to 8. In a small, precarious community, this isn't an exaggeration. The tongue here isn't just about hurt feelings. It's about slander that can split a community in two. It's about a careless word that can expose the group to persecution. It's a world of evil because it has real-world life and death consequences. We see this play out in the tiny one-page letter of 3rd John. The whole letter is about a local leader named Diotrephes, who loves to be first and is slandering us with wicked words. 3rd John 1:6. Here, the evil between us is personified. It's the ego of one leader expressed through the evil slander, destroying the unity and hospitality of the whole network. And of course, the author of 1 John is even more blunt. For him, the test is simple. He writes in 1 John chapter 4, verse 20, "Whoever claims to love God yet hates a brother or sister is a liar. Whoever does not love their brother and sister whom they have seen cannot love God whom they have not seen." For 1 John, evil is simply the absence of love. It is the hatred that allows us to dehumanize the person sitting right next to us. This brings us to our last category, and it's the one that seems to cause the most panic, the evil from outside. This takes two forms, the human deceiver and the non-human adversary. If there is one thing that unites these letters, from the pastorals to 2 Peter to Jude, it's a sheer terror of the false teacher. The authors of the pastoral letters, 1 and 2 Timothy and Titus, are deeply worried about this. The author is desperate for order, for sound doctrine, and for a clear hierarchy to protect the community from chaos. And in the context, the false teacher is the ultimate agent of chaos. The author of 1 Timothy worries that those who have shipwrecked their faith, chapter 1, verse 19, who teach myths and endless genealogies, chapter 1, verse 4. Scholars think these myths might have been early forms of Gnosticism, complex spiritual systems that often taught that the material world itself was an evil creation. The authors of these letters are fighting that, arguing for the goodness of creation. So here, evil is also this hyper-spiritual, world-denying philosophy that, in their view, leads to moral confusion. This fear reaches its absolute peak in 2nd Peter and Jude. In fact, most of the letter of Jude is copied almost word for word into 2nd, and 2nd Peter is a fascinating text, likely the last book of the New Testament to be written. The author is defending the original apostles against mockers. He calls these opponents slaves of depravity, 2 Peter 2:19, who exploit you with fabricated stories, 2:3. Crucially, these authors always link bad belief with bad behavior. In Jude verse 16, they are grumblers and fault-finders who follow their own evil desires. The fear wasn't just that they were wrong. The fear was that their evil ideas would inevitably lead to evil actions that would corrupt the entire group. This is now where the language gets a little bit more intense. The letters of John don't just talk about false teachers. They use a new, terrifying word: Antichrist. 1 John chapter 2 verse 18 says, "Even now many antichrists have come." For this author, the Antichrist isn't a single future supervillain. It's a spirit or movement that is already present, working through the deceivers who were splitting the community. John goes on to say in verse 22, the Antichrist is someone who denies that Jesus is the Christ. It is the ultimate ideological evil. And finally, we do get a more traditional personified evil. The author of 1 Peter, writing to communities that are suffering and feel like foreigners in their own land, gives us this chilling image in chapter 5, verse 8. Be alert and of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour. For an audience that might literally be facing persecution, the roaring lion is a potent metaphor. This evil is the very real, terrifying threat of state power and social annihilation. The author of Hebrews, which in this brilliant, complex sermon by an unknown author, also speaks in chapter 2, verse 14, of him who holds the power of death, that is, the devil. Here, evil is an active, hostile intelligence, an adversary whose goal is to devour, to accuse, and to destroy, similar to that when we look back in the Old Testament. So, what's the picture of evil we get from these final letters of the New Testament? It's not one single, as you'd expect. It's a multi-front war. These authors saw evil not as a simple monster, but as a process, a decay that starts in our hearts, infects our relationships, twists our ideas, and finds its ultimate expression in the systems that oppress us. Evil is the desire and pride in our own hearts, as in James chapter 1 and 1 John chapter 2. Evil is the social breakdown we cause, the partiality, the gossip, the hatred of our neighbor, as in James chapter 2 and 3 and 1 John chapter 4. Evil is the ideological corruption that splinters a group and leads it to ruin, as in 1 Timothy, 2 Peter and Jude. And yes, evil is the cosmic adversary, the roaring lion that actively seeks our destruction, as in 1 Peter chapter 5 and Hebrews chapter 2. For these authors, writing in a fragile and stressful time, evil was anything and everything that threatened to undo the hard work of building a compassionate, unified, and stable community. And for this, the fight against it was just as total, starting with our desires, moving to how we treat our neighbor, and ending with how we face the world. It's a remarkably practical and perhaps timeless definition of the forces that still pull us apart today. So, with that, I'm afraid, listeners, that's all I have time for today on Cogito Ergo Pod. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this deep dive, please help the show grow. You can subscribe and follow Cogito Ergo Pod for free wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else. You can also follow us on Instagram by looking up Cogito_Ergo_Pod. Join us next time as we continue to explore looking at evil in the Bible by looking at that friendly and bubbly source, the book of Revelation. So until next time, be curious.